Hey, that leads me to something really good that I'm going to talk about. Hello, everyone, first of all. And that is I am hiring a producer that's going to
Yay!
produce the show during the live show. So none of this shenanigans happens. Well, if it does happen, at least I'll be able to point the finger at someone else. So that is coming up. He's kind of training and going over software and equipment. He will be starting, I think, in a week or two. So, and I did not do that glitch on purpose, just to let everyone know. But, I try to do a good show, and it's really, really important to me. It's going to cost a little extra money to do this, but I think it's going to just make the shows better. So, starting real soon, we have a show producer. I want to wish everyone that celebrates Christmas a Merry Christmas coming up in just a few days. I hope you have a wonderful and safe Christmas. And I want to thank the supporters that support the show. And if you'd like to help us out for $2 or more a month, that information is on podcastufo.com. We have a real exciting show tonight. It's going to start out with Alejandro and I talking about the breaking news. I was saying to Alejandro earlier, my email was ringing off the hook. I know it's kind of corny, but I've never gotten so many emails this last week since last Sunday. And Alejandro was on Coast to Coast talking about it. A lot of, people that we know on TV, unbelievable. So it's been real exciting. The most exciting week in ufology since I've been at this, absolutely hands down. And so we're going to be talking all about that. And Kevin Randle's he's going to pipe in about 8:05 or something like that tonight. That's EST, and he's going to be talking about the military angle of, reporting UFOs, and he's following this very closely as well. And then our guest for the evening's coming on probably between 8:15 and 8:30. We'll see how it goes with Kevin Randle, and he will be Peter Davenport from NUFORC, the director of NUFORC. Always a great pleasure to speak with Peter. He'll be on then. So I think it's going to be a great show. It's an extended show, hour and a half long, and I hope you enjoy it. The regular listeners will get the free hour, and then subscribers will get the hour and a half. And also, it's on YouTube, and if you can't help us out, you can always listen to the full show at the Dark Matter Digital Network, and that is 10 to midnight Eastern Standard Time tomorrow, Thursday evenings. And I want to say hello to all the great people over there. There's a lot of listeners. And it just occurred to me that a lot of these listeners that are over there are carried over from when I used to do the show live there for 2+ years. So that's why there's so many people still listening over there. Alejandro, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thank you. I am tired. I'm beat right now, especially today. It's been wild and crazy. This whole week, of course, has been pretty crazy. But
it has. Now, if I know that my email's going crazy, yours, you just must have been swamped, totally swamped with email.
well, it's not so much email. It's a lot of other stuff. Just it's our conference, but yeah. But it is related to communications. Yes, communicating with many people, and everybody's just kind of like in this frenzied mode, and as time has gone on, and there's been more and more media, it almost seems like emotions are running higher and higher. And I almost feel like especially this afternoon, last night I had to get in the hot tub, do some meditation, and relax.
Yeah.
And I'm going to need some of that today too.
Oh, you're going to need a producer on your end too. I just heard a noise. Hey. So exciting. All these people we're seeing people on TV. I don't know about you, but people that I know that don't follow UFOs are talking about this. Like I had a conversation today with a friend who absolutely didn't even know I did a show on UFOs. And I asked him if he heard anything about it, and he said, "Oh yeah." And I thought it was kind of funny. The only thing he knew about it was the government had spent money on it. So, there's a mixed take on that as well.
Yeah, that's really funny, and that's where I think we have to be careful. And And I know that the To the Stars Academy people and Elizondo and all of the people involved are trying to be really, really careful about how they're presenting the information and what's getting presented. And you can't always control what's going to get out there. And and I think that that's part of the struggle of kind of what's going on and the angles that'll be taken, and people trying to take over the conversation. And one of the strains of the conversation that was introduced by Politico, and then others have ran with it, is this idea that of cronyism. That Harry Reid, Democratic senator who was the majority leader during the Obama years, um, and unfortunately, just that statement I said right there is, oh, even though it's a statement of facts, it's so politically charged, and
Yeah.
people get really emotional about it. But people trying to say that there was some cronyism between Bigalow and him, and that he was funneling all this money to Bigalow. But we don't have the numbers, and not only that, I think that to me, the message should be that these pilots, these guys who pilot the top technology that the United States has been able to produce, they are trained to identify and fly with other aircraft that are also advanced technology. They're seeing these things. They're in these cases that we've gotten capturing them on their infrared cameras, and they're telling us that these things outclass our technology. These things are unidentified. We don't know whose they are, and Elizondo even made a statement that we couldn't defend ourselves against these things, and that no doubt deserves attention. And $22 million is probably just the tip of the iceberg as far as what probably needs to be spent on investigating something like this. And there's also, argument. Chris Mellon on Coast to Coast kind of made the comment that that not all that money was spent likely on the program,
Right.
or all went to Bigalow. So, and we haven't seen the paperwork or anything on that. So that angle, I think, needs to be squashed. I don't think anybody's speaking about it. Instead, people kind of run from it and hide from it. But it hasn't been let go. And I think with all of these things, all you can do is boldly, go after it. Say, here is our angle on that. And it's certainly mine that this isn't a matter of extreme importance. It's shocking even that the government would say that they're doing this. And people try to ask us, like UFO people, does this validate what you do, or is this aliens? And you know what? Those are not the facts that we need to, or the points that we need to tackle right now. The point that we need to tackle is that it's been revealed that this situation is taken very seriously by the Department of Defense, and especially by the pilots who have seen these things. And they've come out on the news and said, I witnessed this, and I think it's from elsewhere. That's what we have to keep coming back to and remind people that that's what is important. Whether or not they're aliens, or what is behind the phenomena, that's why we need to study it. That's why we need to spend the money to figure out what is behind it. Whether or not it validates us UFO people, that's kind of a cute side story, but that's not the important big story. That's not the point that everybody has to get right now. The point is that this phenomena, that these things happen, and we need to take it seriously, and we need to pay attention to it. That's what we really need to drive home, and we've got this opportunity to do that. And
Yes.
hopefully that's what happens.
I take this as a total opportunity for sure, and this is what I see these days in our social context as like a news story will come out. It's really amazing. It's gone viral, so to speak, and all of a sudden it's yesterday's news and nobody's paying attention.
Yeah.
So there has to be like a striking while the iron's hot, keeping it alive somehow. And I think that's the only way we're going to, any type of action is going to be done. Now, I'm wondering where this is going to go. You mentioned the political part of this, which is really important, and I'm wondering what angles this, or what paths this is going to go down, as far as are people going to be talking about the money spent, or are they going to say, wow, that's in the scope of things, that's not much money, and this is important because of what you said earlier, security risk. We can't outmaneuver. We can't. This is something that could be dangerous, or if it wanted to be dangerous, we'd have no control over it.
And what's interesting is if we look at the case files, even if you look at the Air Force files, the situation of which is what these guys explain is, we see a craft. It is it's an observable unknown. We scramble jets to go check it out. The jets get there, it zips off in an instant, or it demonstrates characteristics that are beyond our own technology. That is the age-old story that we've heard since the days of Blue Book. Blue Book is chock full of situations like this. The famous 1952 Washington, D.C. situation was the same exact thing. That's a story. That we have a record of this sort of phenomena occurring. These same situations occurring for such a long period of time. That's a sort of that's the sort of thing those of us who have been looking at the record can share. That's what's and this is reaching out to the public. It's a lot of people try to look at what are the motivations behind the people who release this information, and that's interesting. But then to begin to speculate on that at this point in time, especially people who haven't even interacted with these men. We don't even know much about these TTSA guys because we haven't heard much except for what's on the news. And I unfortunately have spoken with a few more of them, so I do know some of them a little better than some. But I mean, my take, of course, is these people are very interested in this field just like the rest of us are. But I guess the point is, we need to be careful about even, I think what happens when stuff, and unfortunately, I think in the UFO field, and it makes me really frustrated. It almost makes me think like I don't want to associate with the UFO field as much and try to focus on, the media side of things and the media people community more, because these emotions run high, these opinions run high, and people begin to eat each other. I mean, I've gotten a lot of comments on social media lately, but a ton of negative stuff too. And I don't even know why. I'm just trying to give out information, and a lot of luckily, colleagues treat me well, but then they're kind of eating each other, and it's kind of that's another thing that another danger we have to look out for is us eating each other alive and coming apart at the seams. This is kind of our stand.
Do you think this is done in a point of skepticism, or what do you think spurs this? Now, or do you think there's some of the comments that I got, had to do with, this is Tom DeLonge's doing, blah blah blah, and what does he know, and is it I don't know if I want to use the word jealousy, but is it what would you call it? I mean, is that what you see?
It's hard to speculate. I'm sure there's some jealousy. I'm sure there's resentment. People are like, look, I've been investigating this stuff for decades, and here, these guys, Tom DeLonge and these other guys, come on the scene, and they've only been around for a few years, and they're getting all the attention. But you know what? They deserve the attention. They're doing something, and they're doing something important, and they're getting in front of people. They have resources we don't have. They have, and that's the big key. They have these resources we just don't have at our disposal, and we really should be encouraging the use of those resources. Tom DeLonge, I wrote an article, kind of an analysis of my interactions with Tom DeLonge through this whole thing on the Huffington Post and also at OpenMinds.tv. And, this would not have come about without Tom DeLonge. He's the one who created To the Stars, which then created this To the Stars Academy. He's the one who, behind the scenes, has gathered these officials. Sure, maybe we don't agree with all of his opinions. I don't agree with all of his opinions, but he says he can prove some of what he's saying. And you know what? He has been, at least especially in this instance, he has been proving a lot of us wrong, or at least proving that he can prove some of what he says, that these officials are talking to him, that they're giving him information.
Yeah.
And one piece of information, I'll just add this real quick, that is kind of fringe, that is further than I thought would happen, is this statement in the New York Times that they recovered some unknown material, that they had to modify Bigelow's, facilities in order to house this material. What the heck? I mean, that is really wild stuff.
Wow, that really is. Now, let's talk quickly about the footage that we see now. You know, I saw the first time I saw this, I saw, you know, of course, what's called the Nimitz footage, whether it is or not. But this footage in particular, as the first time I saw it, was in the New York Times article. And so, you know, my son wrote me, he doesn't pay attention to UFOs, and he wrote me like, oh, this is quite a day for the UFO people, isn't it? And, you know, so, you know, everyone was seeing this. So what does something like that, his question was, how does something like that get out?
Yeah, that's a great question, and there's some debate about this, and the Washington Post wrote about that, and I know one of the writers for the New York Times wrote a piece about his work on this, and I haven't read that one yet because there's so many stories coming out, but I, of course, read the Washington Post, their first one out, and they said that Lou had told them that he wanted to get some of this video released to the public for training and for safety training of pilots, but that he secretly wanted to have this information used to show that this department existed and they were looking at the credible UFO cases. That would indicate that, you know, it was released under intentions they were not expecting. I'm kind of hearing that might not be accurate, but I don't know that anybody's asked him directly in an interview and he's spoken to that yet. But that's how they say it was released. So there are two pieces. The New York Times posted them in their article. And I should say, I'm going to give a little bit of background, if you don't mind here real quick.
Sure.
Is that in October, you know, they announced the TTSA, the To the Stars Academy, with all of these very credible people. One of those people, probably the most shocking claims from one of those people, was Luis Elizondo, who said that he worked for the DOD investigating UFOs. Now we know, even though the story kind of died, like you said, you know, these stories kind of go away and nobody pays attention. But we know behind the scenes, the New York Times, Politico, and Washington Post took that very seriously and had been researching whether or not he was telling the truth. The New York Times posted their story 2 months later, just this last weekend. Politico followed up with their story like within an hour, I think, very soon after. And then Washington Post within the same day posted their story. So they took that seriously, and they had been investigating that and found that to be true. When the New York Times posted their story, they also, at the same time, To the Stars Academy released those videos. And the New York Times included them in the story. They said Louise had 3 videos. They released 2. You can get a lot more information actually at To the Stars Academy. They've got more of a write-up on those videos, so anybody interested really should go look at them there. They're the source. But the first one is from the Nimitz incident. I think you've had Robert Powell on. Well, I know you have, last week. And then I've had him on also to talk about this. So Robert Powell's told us about this case. And that video is from that case. And now we know, finally, we have really solid confirmation that video that we've seen that was somehow leaked earlier, and we don't know how it was leaked earlier, is real video from that case. The second video is called the Gimbal video, and we're not even sure. It looks like it's an acronym, why they call it that. But it's another infrared video, but we don't know where it came from. When they released it, they did not include location, date, or time. And Luis probably knows the location, date, and time, but he didn't get permission to release that. And he's not going to release anything he doesn't have permission to release. So we don't even know the background of that story. But that story, similarly shows an object that they're following that takes off. What's interesting about this object, though, is that it seems to have some sort of halo, almost like it has, I don't know, something around it. And on the To the Stars Academy site, they talk about it, how it has some sort of unexplained halo around it. Now, the information at To the Stars Academy, everybody kind of attaches Tom DeLonge to this, but remember, it's actually ran by these very credible people, one of those being Steve Justice, who works for Skunk-Heed Lockworks, the same group that created the SR-71, Stealth, and manages Area 51. They allude to he's the one who did the analysis, and probably with some input from the other guys. So the analysis that you're reading at TTSA is done by people, very credible people who know what they're talking about. Aerospace engineers. So it's analysis that you can rely on. So that's kind of the story behind the videos.
Now, someone wrote me an email, and they said I think the Nimitz video. No, it's not the Nimitz video. It's what you call the Gimbal video. That a co-pilot or another pilot says something about the winds are at, I think he says like 123 miles an hour.
Right.
And he, so the person that wrote me the email said, hey, look, that's like 158 knots, and that's hurricane winds. They would never be up there, so the video is false. So I don't have any idea how that goes, but that does seem like a really high wind.
120 miles per hour. Yeah, he says that up, but they're at like 25,000 feet. I think that is.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that's high for as high as they are. I don't know if that's like a wind speed. In other words, like the resistance in relation to the movement. I'm not sure. They just said they were going against the wind. That's a really good point. That's very high winds. I mean, that's we'd have to question someone in aeronautics or aviation about that. But no one else that I've heard of has raised the concern about that statement. And even the New York Times, nobody also questions the veracity of the videos, that they didn't come from where they were said to have come from. We even have witness testimony. We have the F-18 pilots now have talked to CNN and others, which is terribly fascinating because you have this F-18 pilot, now retired, saying, that not only did he witness this, he was involved with the situation, that he can confirm the video is real, and also saying that he feels that these objects are otherworldly, that we just could not do something like this. The characteristics are something that are not capable of any human technology. Whether or not that's true, I don't know, because, of course, there's the possibility the Russians or maybe even the Chinese have some sort of edge up on us when it comes to anti-gravity technology, or maybe they do have some tech that we are unaware of, and they're making these probes, although they've also said that these things were as big as airliners, so they're very large objects. So
yeah, but going back to what you said earlier, people have been seeing exactly the same thing for many decades.
Exactly. And I think that hasn't even been rolled into this story, and it really should. I think that the major players, the Elizondos and people speaking out there, are trying to stick to the facts of this situation. But I think they really need to roll in at least some of the verified information we have about other cases. And we do, as far as Air Force records. I mean, we can refer to U.S. Air Force investigations. Unfortunately, we don't have any. We have some paperwork to show they've investigated UFOs since 1969, even though they say they have not. we do have some, but they're very short. They're just very summaries of situations. They're not full-on investigations. We have to go all the way back to Blue Book to find full-on investigations. But they do exist, especially Washington, D.C., 1952. You can look at Edward Ruppelt's book, the guy who ran Blue Book. He went over all of that very thoroughly. So I think we do have to bring up this history just to show that when the Air Force did investigate these things, they found the same situations back then that we're explaining to people now. And of course, some of the audience may know, but the very first Air Force investigation, which was Project Sign, that started in 1947, that group of Air Force people that worked at Wright-Patterson for, kind of the Foreign Technology Division. It was called something else back then, but I think it was Air Material Command. But they concluded that that these things could possibly be from extraterrestrial civilizations. That the people higher up didn't like that they included that, didn't feel they had enough evidence to say that. But the people who did come to those conclusions were largely engineers, and they were capable people. These weren't just a bunch of few goofballs. I mean, especially the first time we investigated, it was taken very seriously, and there were some of the top guys on this. So I would highly recommend people read Ruppelt's book. If you haven't, especially given the news from this weekend, it's a must. It's a must read for people.
Now,
and Kevin Randle will tell you the same thing, that's for sure.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to ask, I'll probably ask Kevin this question too, but why do you suppose now? This is coming out now.
Why now? You know, I think some people would have conspiracy theories behind why now, but all indications, at least from what information I have and from what we're being given, is it's all Lou Elizondo. That Lou Elizondo and Tom DeLonge. That Tom DeLonge, and that's why I keep going to Tom DeLonge and the significant role that he played. Tom DeLonge created this To the Stars Academy. He gathered these groups of very credible officials. That seemed to make Lou Elizondo feel comfortable that here was a group of people that I can join to continue to look into this topic outside of the Department of Defense. Lou said he was disappointed with the Department of Defense reaction, that they weren't taking this seriously enough, so he retired, and then he joined To the Stars Academy. And that, because of that situation, that seems to be the why now. There really doesn't seem to be any indication, at least that we've seen, of any other reason as to why now.
And I'll probably ask, or Kevin may touch on this too, but what about, classified? I mean, it would seem like what Lou is talking about should be classified, or at least some of it.
Some of it is. I mean, most of it. Well, not what he's talking about, but he's not talking about much. That's the thing. This is a program that's gone on since 2007. And the only thing he's released are these videos, one of which they have given no information about. The other one, which we've been talking about before this news came out. Robert Powell's been on talking about it. Chris Mellon, one of the TTSA members who worked for Defense Intelligence, he's been talking about it. He talked about it at the TTSA press conference in October. One of the pilots wrote a blog about it. That's how we found out about the case in the first place. One of the pilots wrote a blog about, hey, I'm no X-Files guy, but I chased a UFO.
Right.
So that story's already been out there, and that's the only case that Elizondo's really given us any information about. Otherwise, he's released a video that we don't have information about, and he's talked about this metal, which we also don't have any information about. So Elizondo really hasn't given us much. He said that he can't reveal anymore because he doesn't have permission. One thing we can look forward to is this third video that he supposedly was able to get permission to release, and they haven't yet. And I'm suspecting that as soon as the media cycle, which is a very media-savvy thing to do. I mean, if you want to stay relevant, it's like the Kardashians or something.
Yeah.
Slowly
release it.
Yeah, release information. As soon as people stop paying attention to you, release some big information, and then they keep paying attention to you.
Yeah.
It's something the president does. I mean, this is how you do it. So that's probably when the information will be released, maybe early next week or once the things start to die down, which is good because then it at least allows them to interject some credible information to bring the conversation back and at a credible level. So that's what I'm guessing when we'll see that. But yeah, he hasn't released much. All this other stuff we know about Harry Reid and Bigalow was really stuff that the New York Times discovered in their own investigation.
Okay, we got to bring Kevin on here in just a minute. But quickly, I don't know if you happen to catch Leslie Kean on the CNN last night. Did you happen to?
Of course I did. And the reason I make the funny face is because I was actually invited to be on CNN.
I know.
To be on the show.
I wasn't going to bring that up, but yeah, okay.
Yeah, and it was well, people can see it on my social media. Probably some of the listeners know, and I'm a open book type of guy, and so it was a really bummer. And the girl that was getting me on there, she's really cool. Anyway, I guess the point is that unfortunately, at the last minute or about an hour actually before the program aired, they said, well, actually, we're not going to need you. And then it was interesting because then we saw on social media that Robert Salas, who was part of Malmstrom Air Force Base, where, apparently a UFO was seen and then these nukes were turned off. He said he was going to be on the show. But when the show aired, it was only Don and Leslie.
Right.
And which is fine because you know what? Leslie is one of the co-writers of the New York Times story. She's in the middle of this. She's great. Yeah. She always does a great job in these interviews. So she did a great job. And
she did. And that's what I wanted to say. And we had to bring Kevin on. But I thought she did a wonderful job because he kept trying to lead her down the path of the little green men. And she refrained. She really held her ground and did a really good job with it, I think. Yeah,
she finally kind of said it's possible.
But, I know. I was kind of surprised she actually said that, but she was kind of forced to say that. Really, I mean, he really pushed her right to the point.
Right.
But anyway, she did a heck of a job, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the point isn't, like I said earlier, the little green men. The point is that's why we need programs like this to be able to say whether or not it's little green men or little gray men or human-looking beings from elsewhere or people from the future, people from another dimension, or who knows, space critters or something like that. Who knows what the answer may be ultimately, but that's why we need a program to figure that out.
Yeah, right. Okay, so I'm going to try to bring Kevin in, and we'll see what happens. I can't wait to get my show producer working.
I'm going to stick around and say hi if that's cool.
Oh, no, I want you to stay as long as you want.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Kevin, I see some action going on there. Kevin, how are you? You're live?
Yeah, I'm fine.
I just wanted to warn you that you're live. And welcome to the show, Kevin.
Thank you.
So, Kevin, you're on with myself and Alejandro, and I'm not sure if did you happen to get a chance to listen to our show as we were going along?
No, I was busy eating dinner and things like that.
Oh, okay, that's no problem. So we were talking about...
we were saying a lot of bad things about you.
Yeah, absolutely, that's what it was.
Well, people were emailing me about it. I read all the nasty emails before you guys called, so...
Beautiful, it worked. Okay, so hey, Kevin. So one of the questions I had, and Alejandro may have a question or two, is, and we can go up to the half hour if you have the time, and that is a military person such as yourself, your perspective on what's been going on this last week.
I think the first thing we need to talk about is how an awful lot of the information is not accurate. And by that, I mean the history of the UFO investigations, because they keep talking about how Project Blue Book began in 1947 and that sort of thing. And those of us who studied the phenomenon for a long time realized that the first investigation was an unofficial investigation, began in 1946, at the end of 1946. When Arnold made his sighting in June of 1947, it morphed into an official investigation, but it wasn't until General Twining wrote his letter in September of 1947 suggesting they create a project that would get an official investigation, which began officially in January of 1948, and that was Project Sign. At the time, the name of the project, Sign, was classified. And the military was saying, well, this was Project Saucer. That was the name they gave it in the civilian world. Sign eventually morphed into Grudge, which morphed into Blue Book. And in 1969, they ended Blue Book. But those of us who were paying attention realized the UFO investigation hadn't ended. There was something called Project Moondust. And as I was going through some of the old Project Blue Book files, I found 4 cases in there labeled Moondust, which shows the UFO component to it, and that the fact that the Air Force was aware of it. That lasted until 1985, when the name was compromised by a State Department release of under FOIA. And from that point on, I think it was Robert Todd FOIA to get the name of the project as it was after 1985. And they said, no, the project name is properly classified. We can't tell you what it was. So those of us who've been around for a long time realize that A, there's been investigations going on since 1946, and B, there's been classified investigations going on that lasted beyond the end of Project Blue Book and continued far beyond that point. We now have another specific project that was dealing with UFOs, all the while being told that there's no interest in the government. So this latest information, this latest dump of information tells us an awful lot about what's been going on, and that the government and the military have had a real interest in UFOs, all the while telling us there's nothing to us, nothing to be concerned about, and we don't even bother with investigating them anymore.
Wow.
I think you make a lot of good points in that. I mean, I was going to say the media often doesn't feel like they have to do their due diligence when it comes to the UFO phenomena. They throw out a few bullet points maybe they get from Wikipedia or something like that. But accuracy doesn't seem to be as important as other stories where they really are held to the fire on these things. And I was going to say it's coming back to bite them in the butt, but even today with this big story, I don't think they care. It doesn't seem to be that they're consulting with experts or making sure they're getting their story straight on these items like you're talking about, Kevin. Now, there is getting into the weeds, and there is, it's okay to generalize at some point, but you should be accurate, and we don't have really that sort of accurate information as far as what they're reporting historically. They should be talking to the very few historians or the people who have authored credible books such as yourself, Kevin. Has the media contacted you?
No, I haven't heard a word. And I get media requests all the time. I mean, I was on Expedition Unknown with Josh Gates just this last summer talking about UFOs. And so I get these sorts of things periodically. I've heard nothing about this, and I was a little bit surprised on one aspect of it, that they haven't reached out, given that if you go and look up UFO books on Amazon, you'll find a number of my books, including Encounter in the Desert, which just came out, which shows that I'm still alive and still active in UFO research. But I think you're right, but I think it transcends things. And I remember back when James Brady was wounded in the assassination attempt of President Reagan, and ABC announced that he had died. And then an hour later, they had to retract that statement simply because he was still alive. But I remember the alibi, which was, well, we got it from 4 sources that he had died, and we're not reporting rumors. And I'm thinking, if he's still alive, you're reporting rumors. I don't care how many sources you have, you're reporting rumors. And we see even more of that today. It's even worse today, because I think that the people who are in journalism today haven't been classically trained. I'm thinking of the newspapers, where you might have the time to research a story and get some idea of the way you used to do it in the 50s and the 60s. You had to be accurate in what you're reporting. Today, they'll just they'll have the talking heads on talking about a point, and it turns out it's untrue, and they say, well, we missed on that one. We'll go on to the next one and continue on. And when you get to UFOs, which I don't think any journalist wants to cover, because it tends to, I guess, relate to their own credibility. You can't tell me you believe about little green men from Mars visiting Earth, for crying out loud. So they take a very daisical attitude. And I think you're actually right, Alejandro, when they look at something up on Wikipedia or one of the many, many other UFO sites that have no real credibility, but they don't look for the credibility. They look for the most sensational aspect of the story. But this is getting some very good play in some very good places, and I think that helps the whole thing. And I probably need to apologize to Tom DeLong for saying that disclosure isn't coming and it's not going to help, because this disclosure of this project is a marvelous thing for us to learn in 2017.
And it does show that, even though we've been saying this and the media hasn't been paying attention, that the Air Force and the government does take this topic seriously. We've even got government documents to show them. Look, they are investigating past 1969, even though they claim otherwise. Finally, we have at least validation that, see, we were right. This shows you that they have been looking into it.
If you look at the mission of the Air Force, one of their missions is to protect the skies over the United States.
Right.
And anything that intrudes on our coastal defense zones has to be intercepted and has to be reported on. So even if you're not talking about alien spacecraft, or you're talking about Russian bombers possibly, or other semi-hostile nations, and I use the word semi-hostile, penetrating our coastal defense zones, they have to be intercepted. And if it's a UFO, some kind of an alien spacecraft, they are required to intercept it to find out what it is and does it present a threat to the security of the United States. So when they say we don't investigate UFOs, we know that's not true. Even when we didn't have this latest admission, we knew it wasn't true, because that is an Air Force mission to do that.
Kevin, so I'm sure you most likely saw the interview with the retired Navy pilot David Fravor. In a situation like that, a military person, retired or not, and coming forward and talking about the sightings, which were actually, it was a very good interview. What do you think about that? As far as him being so free to talk about it.
I wonder about that, simply because I know that there are security regulations still in effect. I called a general named Cruikshank, who was the head of ATEC back in the 1960s. And I called him in the 1990s. And I remember the conversation was very short. And he said to me, I don't know who you are. I don't know what is still classified and what isn't classified, and I'm not going to talk to you. This suggests to me that he had some sort of inkling that he could talk about this with impunity. If there was classified intercept tactics used, then he shouldn't have burned those, and I don't think he really did. But he must have had some sort of permission to talk about it, especially after this thing came out and everybody's talking about this case. I know that Robert Powell had looked into it a number of years ago and talked to people about it. So the case has been out in the public arena. It's the first time one of the pilots has really talked about it in a public arena. So I would think that if I was him, I would have called someone to find out what I could talk about without jeopardizing my retirement or jeopardizing my status in the military. So he must have had some kind of permission to talk about it, but I don't know how much permission he might have had and who he would have gone to about that. Or they may have contacted him and said, listen, reporters are going to be calling you. You can say this, this, and this, because we already knew who it was. It wasn't that big of a secret. So, he probably knew exactly what he could say and probably didn't say anything more than he had to.
Do you think it was scripted?
No, I don't think so. I think they might have said to him, you can talk about the intercept if there were classified tactics being used or some kind of classified gear being used. Don't mention that, but you're free to talk about what you saw and how you reacted and what you felt and what was going on there. So I don't think it was scripted. I think it was basically them asking questions and him knowing exactly what he could say and what he couldn't say. If in fact there were any restrictions on what he did say, and I'm just speculating that I would think that there might have been some restrictions, but I don't know. I know in my case, my top secret clearance probably expired in 2014. just because every 5 years you've got to update your top secret clearance, it automatically downgrades to a secret clearance after 5 years unless it's you're reinvestigated or it's looked at again. So I'm sure that he knows all of that sort of stuff, and he knew exactly what he could talk about. And maybe they just said, yeah, the people will be calling you, have fun.
Do you mind if I ask one more question?
Oh, yeah, go right ahead. Sure, yeah.
So you mentioned ATEC earlier, and they were the guys in charge of Project Sign, right? And could you, I guess, just to show the difference, at least since the budget was cut in 2012, and even before that, it seems like Bigalow was the lead. So whatever group of people they had were not ATEC. I mean, they were not at the level of these guys. And since 2012, it seems like it was just Lou and maybe a couple other people at their desk, kind of like the Nick Pope situation. One guy at the desk trying to shuffle around some papers and figure something out. So it's not like there were much resources put towards it. But this is why Project Sign is so important, because that was really a large effort. That had a lot of very capable people looking into these cases. Could you explain what ATEC is, the acronym, and you know who these guys are?
Well, it was the Air Technical Intelligence Center, and they had a lot of different functions. They were at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and it was part of research and development. One of the things they would do is reverse engineer aircraft from other countries. For example, if we happened to capture a Russian fighter in some fashion, they would look at the Russian fighter and see how it compared to our fighters, any improvements they might have had. And when Belenko defected from the Soviet Union into Japan with a MiG-25, the one thing I remember, they said their vacuum tube technology was just wonderful. It was vastly superior to our vacuum tube technology, but we didn't care because we had circuit boards and solid state circuitry. So that was far superior to the best of the vacuum tube technology, but that was what the Soviets had done. And so that was one of their missions, to look at those sorts of things and see where it went. But they also had intelligence functions looking at the capabilities of other nations and what their militaries were doing and how well equipped they were, how well trained they were, and that sort of thing. But it was not just UFOs. The UFO project was a small part of that. And when it began, it had it didn't have all that many people involved in it, but it did have a high priority. It was a classified project. The name was classified, and they were gathering the information from all kinds of sources that they could find, including military people. This latest project apparently just dealt with military sightings, which I think they looked at it from the point of view that if it was a military person making the sighting, they may have been a little bit better trained than your average civilian in what's going on around them, and might have been a little bit better in observing what exactly they had seen, especially when you move into the arena of aircrew. And by aircrew, I mean not only the pilots, but the crew chiefs and the flight engineers and the loadmasters and the people who are on aircraft, who have been around aircraft all the time. Their observations would be very, very important, especially if you had multiple people involved in that sort of thing. But ATEC evolved into something else, and I forget the acronym at the moment, but it's still a intelligence function, Air Technical Intelligence Center. It was an intelligence function. And part of what they did was gather information about UFOs. Sign eventually sort of collapsed when General Vandenberg, who was the Air Force Chief of Staff at the time, looked at what was called the estimate of the situation put together by the people at ATEC, which concluded that the observations were of interplanetary craft. In late 1940s, they were thinking interplanetary as opposed to interstellar. And Vandenberg didn't buy it and said, no, I don't redo this thing. And I think that they were looking for something with physical evidence. And I'm not sure that the guys at ATEC would have had the stuff from Roswell and that sort of thing. So they're putting it together based on what they had at their disposal. And a lot of it was sighting reports by military personnel and airliner personnel, airline crews. So I think that Vandenberg rejected it simply because he didn't think they proved their case. But what happened was, it pretty well cleaned out Project Sign. The people who were involved in creating this estimate of the situation were basically all fired. There are only 2 or 3 people who survived. And Sign went into decline. The military said, well, we're going to close Project Sign. We're not going to do that anymore. They just changed the name to Grudge and kept right on going and began to restaff it. And in 1951, I think it was, one of the generals says, what's going on with the flying saucer stuff? And he was told, well, not much. And he said, fix it. And that was when they brought in Ruppelt, and they changed the name to Project Blue Book, or it evolved into Project Blue Book. And for a while, there was an attempt to gather proper information, but it quickly became a public relations outfit and a debunking outfit. There's nothing to the flying saucers. The interesting thing, and they don't mention this, is that the Condon report, and Condon was the University of Colorado scientist who was charged with investigating UFOs for the Air Force at the end of the 1960s. And his mission wasn't to investigate UFOs so much as to convince the public there's nothing to it, and that they should close Project Blue Book and save themselves the money that it cost to investigate. They had UFO officers at all bases, and it was an additional duty. They didn't have somebody specifically assigned to that. It was an additional duty, but they were getting reports from all around the country. And they allegedly quit that. And now we find out, of course, that's not true. But I've kind of got off topic here with you. The air technical...
Not necessarily. No, that was a great point.
But actually, I have to interrupt you both. I'm sorry, because we only have like 5 minutes, and I have to call Peter Davenport right at the half hour. But quickly, in these last 5 minutes, shifting gears, can I get opinion? I'd like to get an opinion from actually both of you on how Bob Bigalow kind of plays into this whole thing. And Kevin, do you understand where I'm coming from?
Yes, I do. And at the MUFON conference in 2010, I think it was, Bigalow came up to me and asked me if I still had my top secret clearance. And I think that he was looking at some of this stuff. But Bigalow also was the one that went to Harry Reid, who was the senator from Nevada, who kind of engineered this whole study getting going. And I'm wondering if there wasn't some sort of political payback going there, that Bigalow had contributed to Harry Reid's successful Senate campaigns and that sort of thing. And this is one of the things that Bigalow wanted done, to gather this information in a classified nature. I think that may be why he approached me to ask about my top secret clearance. But Bigalow, of course, is a civilian contractor working out of Las Vegas, and I guess he's really, really rich, which I'm very envious of, because I'd like to be really, really rich.
Yeah.
But that ain't happening. So
not yet, but you never know. One of those books just may take off, especially now.
I did look my name up on Celebrity Net Worth, and I found one site that claimed I had $134 million. And so I don't even know. I don't even know why I'm talking to you guys. That obviously is very, very inaccurate.
So Alejandro,
but it shows you how valuable that is. But the point simply is, Bigalow, I think, engineered part of this because he was looking for gathering of intelligence of what the spacecraft could do, getting better information than he might get through some of the civilian sources that were available to him.
And Alejandro, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, just really quickly. I mean, I don't worry so much about the cronyism sort of thing, as I think that Reid was convinced. He even said John Glenn. That was really interesting, that John Glenn had told him, you need to look into UFOs. We had never heard that before, so that was fascinating. So he was convinced by Bigalow and John Glenn, who knows what else, that this was something that we really needed to look into. So he started the project. Bigalow, of course, having the resources, having the interest, was one of the few people out there who believe in UFOs are going to put their neck out there to run something like this.
And had the money to do it.
And had the money to do it. And what's interesting for Kevin in 2010 and myself with MUFON in 2009, little did we know when Bigalow was starting to work with MUFON and researchers that this is where part of the project, or at least this project, was going on at the same time. Perhaps that's even where the funding came from. So I think that's what it's all about. Bigelow's really interested on, and a little bit more of a something that would have worked for him. He was looking for technologies that he could then develop into Bigalow Aerospace. He didn't apparently find any, because he eventually bought a program that NASA kind of shelved. And so it's very human technology that now he's developing and working with NASA with. But that's what he was trying to do. And one other point, just real quick, on the closing of Blue Book, I think another thing that they really need to highlight, and is a very important part of that history, is I think it was the Bollinger memo, but essentially a memo where one of the guys essentially had said, hey, we don't care if they close Blue Book because the important cases we send elsewhere anyway. And that's very important.
We should point out that Bollinger was a brigadier general in the Air Force at the time he made that announcement, and that's a very important thing to do. It wasn't some second lieutenant or some master sergeant saying it. It was a brigadier general who was making that comment that the important cases were not part of the Blue Book system.
Well, gentlemen, I wish we had more time because this is a real fascinating topic, and we're just going to see what happens in the next, like I had said to Alejandro before you came on, Kevin, it's almost like we need to strike or keep this thing alive because news fades so quickly these days. So I think this is an opportunity for, for this subject to be looked at real seriously.
I'm going to try to get something up on my blog here in the next few days talking about this specifically. There's another way of kind of spreading the word out.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks so much, Kevin. And Alejandro, thank you as well.
My pleasure.
And I'll talk to you real soon, everyone.
Bye, Alejandro.
Talk to you later. See ya.
Bye. All right. So now it's time to get our guest, Peter Davenport, and we're going to be ringing him right now. And again, I'm going to have a show producer doing all this stuff. So hopefully it'll be seamless coming up.
Good evening, Martin.
Hello, Peter. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Thanks so much. We have just talked for, about an hour about this, this amazing story that just broke in the New York Times. Have you been following that, actually?
I have indeed. I think I've received probably 250 copies of
I know.
every article over the last week or 5 days.
Yeah,
anyway.
I too. People have been really kind in that way, sending all the different things that have come out in all the different media to me. And, I don't think I've ever gotten more email about the UFO subject in my life.
Yeah, it's really stirred the hornet's nest, and it seems to be a significant change in how people are taking the UFO phenomenon. Of course, we devotees feel we know what's going on to a degree, but the rest of the world has been sort of blasé on the subject. I think it's going to be much more difficult for them to ignore it from this point forward.
I totally agree. So, Peter, real quickly for the first-time listener that is, wants to know a little bit about you, can you just give a real quick your background real quickly?
Yeah, I'm. I guess I should start with my high school education. I was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri, where I saw my first UFO as a very young boy in 1954. Then attended high school in Ethiopia, and then finally graduated from high school in New Hampshire. Went off to college in California at Stanford. Spent 4 years in the Army as a Russian translator, a language I've used to great benefit over the last 50 years or so, and used to be the field investigator and director of investigations for the Washington chapter of the Mutual UFO Network back in the 90s, and have been the director of the National UFO Reporting Center since July of 1994. So
Amazing.
I've spent a lot of time both in public and private sector. I've worked as a university instructor, flight instructor, done a great many things, but none as exciting as my current job as director of the National UFO Reporting Center.
Now, Peter, didn't you say that your office is in a missile silo? Do I remember that correctly?
Well, people try to put me there. I own an ICBM missile site south of Davenport, Washington, but although my intentions were to live there, I don't. And it's because it's large, drafty, damp, and it's sort of lonely out there. And after I bought it, I discovered that I'm much more socially inclined than I thought up to the point I purchased the site. But I do own it, and it's quite a remarkable place. It's about 18,000 square feet underground.
Wow.
Consists of about 2 to 3 million tons of concrete, and every inch of it needs cleaning.
Oh my God! Wow. So we'll talk, of course, about the sightings, the very interesting sightings that happened on December 9th. I want to talk about that, but also before we go on, your Russian language background. I actually tried to learn Russian. I know just some words, and I can understand just a little bit of it here and there. Very difficult language. How has that served you as far as the UFO field? Have you been able to do any investigations that interest you in Russia or anything like that?
I have not, although my ability with Russian introduced me to the well-known UFO personality. His name is Azhaja. That's his last name. I met him in Seattle. He wanted to meet me when he learned that I was director of the UFO Center here, and we had a wonderful day together talking about UFOs and Russia and politics and so on. When I worked in the Soviet Union, I was a guide and a translator on a U.S. exhibit sent to the Soviet Union in 1978 and 79. And we had up to 25,000 Soviet citizens flood through the exhibit every day. The title of the exhibit was Agriculture in the United States, Сельское хозяйство в США in Russian. And when many of the guests that came through, the Soviet guests or Russians, discovered that I was interested in UFOs, I was a very popular guide. They had stories to tell that wouldn't stop. And so it reinforced what I think we all know, namely this phenomenon, the UFO phenomenon occurs everywhere in the world. I suspect that these UFOs appear in every country on the planet. So in that respect, it has been a boon to my UFO research.
Wow, yeah. When I was there for a couple of months this year and had been there the last couple of years as well. I tried to do as much as I could as far as trying to connect to people in the UFO field. It was very difficult. I finally did, but I tried to get people on the show, but they just weren't comfortable with their English. But the bottom line is, I did find that there is a lot of sightings in Russia. In Russia, of course, the landmass is the second largest country, in the world. But I mean, in general, there's a lot going on in Siberia. There is actually a lot going on the Black Sea where I was at. So, like you said, everywhere in the world, it is fascinating.
Well, I received reports from Russia or the former Russian areas of the country, of the Soviet Union, on a regular basis. People submit them. Sometimes they're submitted in Russian, and I have an opportunity to use my Russian and translate them. So it reinforces the notion that, or the suspicion that these objects are being seen everywhere. I often wonder what it must be like to live in a remote area of Africa and have one of these things come down over your head or be visible to you, let's say, and not know what to do or how to report it. So,
right.
They're seen everywhere, as far as I can tell.
One of the guests I had recently, which was a really, really interesting show a while back, was one of the Ariel School incident first-hand witnesses. And, she was I think she was in the 6th grade, and she said, she had no idea that a UFO, what a UFO was, or the topic had never come up. And
Yeah.
so that's just the same thing of basically what you're saying, in the remote area where someone has no access to, say, media and sees anything about UFOs or any, movies per se that depict, aliens, so to speak. Or I'm not saying that all UFOs are aliens or any of them are. We don't know. But anyway, it was fascinating to hear her first take on it.
Oh, yeah. That was a very interesting incident. And I commend John Mack for publicizing it so extensively.
Right.
But a little-known fact among our listeners and everybody else probably is that something very similar happened in California exactly 1 week before. The aerial sightings occurred on September 16th. It was a Friday, I believe, 1994.
Right.
But I had taken a series of reports from, I believe it's Cameron, California. I'm going on memory. This is all 23 years ago now or more. Cameron, California. I took a report from an FAA air traffic supervisor who called me up and said that they were seeing all sorts of unidentified targets on their radar. Shortly after that, I took a report from a couple of women who were cleaning a large building in Santa Barbara. They had seen a disc go right by their window. But the reason I tell this story is later that morning, I got a call. This is now Friday afternoon after I'd taken the call earlier that morning from it was a story. The woman who called was a nurse at a school, and she was calling to relate how earlier that morning one of the students at her school in Northern California had come into her office crying, recounting how she had been standing at the bus stop at 5:30 or 6 o'clock in the morning, and a little gray creature had come up to her and said, essentially, "Do you want to take a ride in my spaceship?" And some of the report is posted to our website. I think it would be for the 9th of September, 1994, and it was a very convincing set of reports that I took in rapid sequence, and it's very similar to the aerial incident that occurred exactly 1 week later.
That amazing. Wow, I'd never heard of that one.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, you're so, boots on the ground as far as the reportings go. I'm sure after all these years you've heard just some amazing things. And, right off the bat, what would you say some of the, besides December 9th, which we'll talk about, what has been some of the really amazing incidences that were reported to you?
Yeah. Well, the one that always comes to mind immediately when people often ask, what's the most dramatic event you've ever covered? And I think without a doubt, it was the Phoenix Lights event.
I thought you were going to say that.
March 13th, 1997.
Yeah.
A lot of people are aware of the Phoenix Lights. They've seen some of the video on the but they're probably not aware of how large those objects were. And I can share that will allow anybody with even a primitive grasp of trigonometry to do their own calculation. The object that was seen hovering by a multitude of people over Camelback Mountain, which is a prominent feature of Phoenix, just probably about 4 or 5 miles north of Sky Harbor Airport. The object at that point, we know from testimony by a fighter pilot, was at 9,000 feet above ground level, so just almost 2 miles above ground level.
Mm-hmm.
But to the people on the ground, it subtended an arc. It filled the sky, subtended an arc of about 135 degrees. In other words, more than a third of the circle. And if you do the trigonometry, you quickly realize that that object was more than 8 miles in width, if this information is correct.
Oh my God, I've heard people suggest it being a mile wide. But,
no, it
wow.
was vastly larger than a mile wide, and again, I would invite any of our listeners to draw a diagram. An object 9,000 feet above your head, it intersects about 135 degrees of arc of the sky. It completely blotted out the stars overhead. And it hovered there motionless for 5 minutes, and then suddenly fired what appeared to be a laser-like beam of white light at the ground, and then suddenly jumped down and hovered over Sky Harbor Airport. In fact, at least one airliner, the crew, the captain and first officer, refused to leave their gate as long as that object was above their aircraft at the airport there.
Wow. So while this was happening, were you getting reports actively during the sighting?
Dozens, one right after the other. The phone was ringing off the hook with callers from Phoenix and surrounding communities, and even neighboring states reported it.
Wow.
New Mexico reported it. Nevada the starting point from my vantage point of the Phoenix Lights is Henderson, Nevada, for which I have a very nice written report from a gentleman who saw these objects heading to the southeast towards Arizona, towards Phoenix. So I can't tell you how many calls I got with any great accuracy, but I can say that the phone was ringing faster than I could answer it at many times during that night. And probably the most interesting call of all that I received was about 8 hours after the Phoenix Lights event occurred. I got a telephone call from a gentleman who identified himself as an airman in the U.S. Air Force, and he had been involved in the scramble of two F-15 C model fighter jets that had gone screaming out of Luke Air Force Base, located just west of Phoenix. And when those jets returned to base, he was involved in helping the pilot get out of his cockpit. The pilot, for some reason, had difficulty getting out of the cockpit under his own steam. So there were a lot of things that took place that night, and most Americans, tragically, are still not aware of how dramatic that event was.
Now, what can you give any details about what he said about the pilot?
Yes, the pilot could not undo his own lap straps and chest straps and shin straps, so his crew raised the canopy for him. They undid his straps and they physically lifted him out. As the pilot was being lifted out, he was telling his crew what he had just experienced, what he'd just been through, and what he had seen. He told them, according to this tape-recorded conversation, that as he was approaching the object from the north, the left-hand wingtip was at his 9 o'clock position as he viewed the object through his canopy. The right-hand wingtip of it was at his 3 o'clock position. In other words, the object was so large that it completely filled the sides of his canopy and his windscreen. And they intercepted it, and at one point, all the instrumentation on his instrument panel went to white noise. The screen on the instrument panel went to white noise.
Wow.
And at that point, I suspect that the fighter pilot just broke off the intercept. He said not only did his radar screen go to white noise, but all the lights on the craft dimmed. So now he's streaking at an object that is immense by his measure, and he cannot see it visually, and he cannot see it on his radar. At that point, I strongly suspect he broke off the intercept, returned to base, and that's when he started telling the stories about what had happened to his ground crew.
Amazing. So it sounds like he was a basket case basically, and just couldn't deal with it and had trouble getting out of the cockpit, as you say.
Well, he was lucid enough to be able to talk coherently and to recount what he had been through. I suspect if his commander had known what he was doing there, he would have spoken to that pilot pretty firmly.
Yeah.
But after they got the pilot out of the cockpit and standing up on the platform next to the aircraft, the airman who called me went down off the platform, raced around to the right side of the aircraft, and pulled the videotape out of a canister. It was a Lantern 2 canister or Lantern 2 pod, and pulled the videotape out of it and raced it to a waiting T-39 executive jet that had its engines running already. They threw the videotapes in there, in the T-39, which closed its door and revved up its engines and taxied out to the main runway and flew off into the night. For what destination, we have no idea. But I presume they flew those tapes to Washington, D.C.
Yeah. It's amazing to think that somewhere those tapes exist, and what amazing footage that must be.
Yeah, and that's the same government that's denying, at least up until last weekend, is denying the mere American citizen access to all this information, which the American taxpayer has paid for and paid for dearly to be collected.
Right. And
altogether inappropriate.
Yeah, and along those lines, I had Kevin Randle was on for a little bit, just a little while ago, and basically said the Air Force's job is to protect the skies. And, when they cannot at least have window dressing enough to show that they're protecting the skies, I'm sure that is, 99% of the reason why we don't have that information is because they're helpless.
Yeah, that could well be. Clearly, we don't have the technology that we've designed and built on this planet that would allow us to defend our planet from the type of technology we think we see in discussing the UFO phenomenon.
Right. So back in 1997, the internet was, fairly active. Is that how people found your phone number as far as calling to report this?
No, I think there are other means for them to discover our number as well. The National UFO Reporting Center was set up by my predecessor as director. His name was Robert J. Gribble, and he was a Seattle fireman for his career as an adult, and he was very interested in the UFO phenomenon from the late 40s, perhaps starting with the Kenneth Arnold case that began in the state of Washington, as you may know.
Mm-hmm.
And Bob invited, for example, many of the prominent figures in ufology to the state of Washington to speak. Well, when he retired from the Seattle Fire Department, I believe in 1994, he argued that what we needed was one telephone number. Of course, 1974, did I say 94? 1974, long before the advent of the internet, so telephonic communication was about the best means of communicating there was. So he set up the National UFO Reporting Center and its associated hotline, and we've had that same telephone number ever since, area code 206-722-3000. And that is what I inherited in 1994 when I took over the reins for Bob. He'd done it for 20 years, and I think he had grown very tired. He was meticulous and thorough in his job, and I suspect after 20 years he'd probably had enough.
Now, I don't want to stay on this too long, but I'd like to talk about a negative thing, and that is you're getting prank call after prank call after prank call.
Hundreds a day.
Hundreds a day. And I would like to invite the listener to email me. That's martin@podcastufo.com for any ideas on how to stop how to stop these prank calls from coming in, because you're talking about 10,000 of them since it started. And so please do email me. And what have you done so far to try to curtail that?
Well, I've talked to an attorney. Initially, she said she thought we had a very good case for internet harassment, which is a federal crime, I'm led to believe from what you said. Then I was directed to our U.S. Senator. I haven't followed through on that because it's just not clear to me what a U.S. Senator could do. Just last week, I went to the FBI website, and there is a page. It's called IC3, the letter I, letter C, number 3.com, that allows people to submit complaints to the FBI, which they... And I have not followed through on that. I'm taking so many prank calls, I haven't had the time to craft the careful letter where I'd like to submit to explain to the FBI what's going on. Once I get that done, it may curtail some of these calls, but now we know who did it. Sometime on or about the 26th of August, a Saturday, a young woman from Portland, age 24, placed a video on YouTube with 9 what she calls scary numbers, scary telephone numbers. And the 9th one, it looks like it was tagged on at the end, is the hotline number for the National UFO Reporting Center. Well, all of that was 10 or 11,000 prank calls ago. It's roundly disappointing how many young, ill-tempered, foul-mouthed youth there are in our nation who are willing to call a perfect stranger and just spew the most god-awful, quadruple X-rated profanity you've ever heard in your life. That's what America has declined to.
Peter, I'm really sorry to hear that, because you are trying to do a good, honest job and collect data, and it's just not right. And I've heard you talk about this on Coast to Coast a couple of times, and it really, really bothers me. I wish there was something that I could do to help you, and perhaps one of the listeners out there will have a suggestion. They'll email me that might help you in some way other than what you've already tried to do.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I appreciate your kind words and your effort to help, and appreciate in advance, my thanks in advance to any of your listeners who might submit ideas that end up working. I've had many people submit recommendations, like blowing a police whistle in the phone and so on, as you know. And But you have to be careful, because you can annoy somebody to the extent that it worsens the situation, and I don't want to do that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's just helplessness, and to try to figure out how to screen the calls coming in is another difficult thing to do, because unless they're coming from the same number, or you may have legitimate numbers coming from a caller ID that's unknown. So, I mean, I'm sure that happens as well.
Yeah. Right. It's changed the way in which I use the hotline, because I now turn the ringer off and screen calls according to the caller ID. If it's somebody who is a private caller or unknown name, I just don't answer the call, because almost invariably those are prank calls. And I've just grown very tired of it.
Now, we have a police officer in the that I'd actually know who actually comes here sometimes and joins in, Donnie, and he's saying that you should consider a 2-step reporting process where the reporter fills out a basic form and supplies a callback number. I'm sure you've already thought of that, though, or something similar.
Yep. That's pretty much what we do. I should describe for a moment the way I run the hotline and the National UFO Reporting Center. I take the position, Martin, that the only kind of report that counts for anything is a written report. One of the hardest things I've ever done in my life has been trying to get Americans to write things down. Invariably, when they call the hotline, they want, half an hour, maybe an hour, tops 2 hours to tell me all about their sighting. Obviously, I don't have enough time in my day to accommodate everybody's desire and wish to tell me the whole story. So what I do is listen to maybe a 15 or 30-second description of what they saw to get a rough idea and filter out things like sightings of Venus or Jupiter or missile launches. There's a lot of chaff that comes in here that has absolutely nothing to do with UFOs. So I try to filter that out as quickly as I can. But then I invite the people to sit down at a computer and type up a detailed written description of what they allegedly had seen. We like to know where they were, what direction they were looking, the time, the date, the relative size of the object they saw compared to a star or a planet or a full moon, the color, whether it was moving, how many of them there were. There are many parameters that can be recorded, of course. And I invite them to type up a statement, like typing a letter, spell check it, correct any errors they might encounter, and then copy and paste it into the description box of our report form, fill in the other boxes, and send us a report. Almost invariably, I will post those reports to our website, irrespective of whether I think they're addressing a genuine, authentic UFO sighting, oftentimes with a comment. Sometimes I'll make a comment that I suspect they were looking at the star Sirius or the star Capella or Arcturus or some celestial body. There are many, many reports of those items in the night sky, and then post the report. And I'm very liberal with what I allow to be posted. So long as it does not contain profanity, I am inclined to post it just to let the world know that we've received the report and that we suspect it's some kind of a description of a celestial body or an aircraft or something along those lines.
Yes, a lot of UFO videos, I'm sure you know, people are so shocked that there is a lot of profanity in them. They don't understand what they're seeing, basically. So now, a question I have about getting back to your phone number, do you think that you could do without, I hate to say this, but do you think you could do without having a number and just have people fill out or contact you online, or do you think it's real important to keep this number?
Yeah, you have no idea how many times I've almost ripped the cord out of the wall, Martin.
Yeah.
And how many times I've thought and yearned for that kind of situation. But again, it goes back to the problem of getting people to write things down. I've decided there has to be a telephone. If somebody has seen a UFO within the last several minutes or even seconds, they have an insatiable yearning to tell somebody about it right now.
Yes.
And you have to accommodate them at least to a degree. But the one thing I try not to do is talk at great length for several reasons, and I'll share this with our listeners. I think they will understand. I have observed over the last 24 years, and I think during those 24 years I've probably taken 300 to 400,000 telephone calls.
Wow.
And
wow.
If the one thing I've observed is the more I talk with a party who calls about a recent sighting or a sighting even from the distant past, the less likely are we to get a written report. It's almost as if they've expiated their sin and they go on and don't want to get involved anymore. So I try not to talk at any great length. Also, the second reason I try not to talk at length is because the more you talk to a witness, particularly shortly after their sighting, the more you risk changing their story. And that's what I don't want to do. In the ideal situation, a person would sit down at his computer or her computer right after the sighting and record every scrap of information they possibly can, turn it into a well-organized written description of the event, and then submit it using our online report form on our website at ufocenter.com. That's the ideal way to do it.
I agree. It's come up a number of times on the show how important it is to do something immediately, because your memory, even if you just start talking about it and people ask you questions, your memory can change. And, as soon as you can if you can't get to a computer, get to a piece of paper and write down everything you just saw. That's a suggestion that I have. Now, MUFON does not have a call-in number, do they?
I think most states do, and they have a call-in number to their headquarters. It's not a hotline the way mine is.
I see.
But I haven't called it, but I suspect anybody you reach at a MUFON number is prepared to take a report over the telephone and a written report. So they do essentially the same thing I do, as far as I know, although they're an investigative body and a membership body, which the National UFO Reporting Center is not. Many people call or send us an email wanting to become a member of the National UFO Reporting Center, but we don't have members. It's really only one indefatigable, dedicated worker at the hotline, combined with and supported by a very dedicated webmaster who's worked pro bono gratis for 23 years now.
Oh, by the way, did he escape the fires?
He did, and you heard that broadcast, obviously.
I did, yes. That's great.
The next day, I got an email from him. He was delighted by all of the emails that people had sent him with words of support for him and his wife. And he was very touched by that. And who knows, it might have had an effect, because the fire died down just 1 mile, I presume, to the east of his house.
Wow. Boy. Yeah, that's real tough times for those people out there. Yeah. Really something. So, all right, I want to talk about what happened on December 9th. It was quite a night for you.
Yeah, it was, and I'm still on the fence over what happened, because just this evening I received a very convincing article that the U.S. Air Force had a joint operation with the U.S. Army on that night. So I'm unclear on what happened, and as you can well imagine, when somebody calls and says a flotilla of objects passed over my head a few minutes ago, the first question that enters my mind is, could it have been aircraft or satellites? Probably more like aircraft. You wouldn't expect a flotilla of satellites, of course. And I grilled people when they called over the hotline, could they have been aircraft? And they were emphatic in stating that they were not aircraft at all. Let me go back to the beginning and lay a little groundwork for our listeners so they understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Saturday night, the 9th of December, 2017, I got a telephone call from a gentleman in South Carolina who recounted that he just had witnessed a flight of very strange-looking objects moving, and this is significant, from his left to his right in the southern sky from his location. And what he saw, he reported, were flashing red and white lights. And that's significant because, of course, all aircraft flying at night, any pilot, even a student pilot, would know this. Any aircraft flying at night is required under the federal aviation regulations and international aviation regulations as well to have a red light on the left wingtip, a white light on the right wingtip. Anybody who operates a boat at night knows that. Same is true of ships at sea.
You mean green?
They have that red light on the left or port side, a green light on the right or starboard side.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, everybody reported, subsequent to this first sighting reported from South Carolina, everybody was adamant that there were no green lights on the left or the right-hand wingtip of what they were looking at. It was just a very bizarre-looking cluster of objects. And I would direct our listeners, anybody who's looking at our website or will in the future, to look at the report from Carbondale, Illinois, reports from Montana. All of these people are quite familiar with aircraft at night, and every one of them was adamant in insisting that they were not looking at aircraft. So just a brief overview of what happened. According to the data I have in my database to date, the objects were later, very shortly after they were reported in South Carolina, they were reported from Carbondale, Illinois. Following that, they were reported from central Missouri, the area of Rolla, Missouri, as well as Lake of the Ozarks, in which people were describing that the objects were flying to the east. They were looking to the north, and they were flying from their left to their right, so they're going to the east in many instances out in the Midwest. From Missouri, they were reported from Hays, Kansas, where a gentleman saw this flotilla of objects over his head moving to the east. He jumped in his car and was following them for 20 or 30 minutes, he estimated, driving to the east. If they had been jet-powered transport aircraft, they would have been long gone in the 20 or 30 minutes that he was driving to catch up with them or try to catch up with them. They were then reported from Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, Idaho, Utah, Washington State, Nevada, and California. And this is the event that the Air Force has said was caused by a flotilla of aircraft. Initially, they said 100, then they dropped it to 17, then the number dropped to 12, and in the article I just saw tonight on the Internet about the joint operation, they are back up to 100 aircraft, including, by the way, F-16s and F-15s. And I mention that fact, Martin, because nobody reported any sound emanating from the sky that seemed related to this event.
Do you think you said that this seemed like very credible as far as this, the military doing this. Do you think that this is actually something that has come up? Do you think it's possible that this is a story, or do you think this really did happen, that they were running these planes?
Well, that's hard to say. The article from the military is very convincing. I'm quick to admit that. Uh-huh. They cite the units that were involved. They cite some of the Air Force bases where the aircraft had been drawn from, where they were headed. But the peculiar thing is they cite that well over 100 aircraft were involved in the deployment, including at least 17 C-17 aircraft. And they go on to say that it was to deploy 120 paratroopers. Well, you don't need 17 C-17 transport four-engine aircraft to deliver 120 paratroopers. You can probably do that with one C-17 transport.
Right.
So why they required all those aircraft, God only knows. And let it be said as well that this alleged exercise, I have to call it alleged, occurred on a Saturday night. Anybody who's been in the military knows that what soldiers and airmen like to do on Saturday night is visit the NCO club, or officers the officer club. And it would have been a very unpopular thing to stage an operation of this magnitude on a Saturday night. Again, December 9th was on a Saturday.
Now, what about the height that most people thought? Because the sound, of course, they wouldn't hear if it was at a certain altitude. Did people speculate how high these objects were?
Well, people always speculate as to the altitude of an object they're looking at, and all that speculation is probably a waste of time. But people described how the objects moved across the sky fairly rapidly in some cases, other cases not at all. Two reports from Montana, Dillon and Laurel, Montana. Laurel is just west of Billings. Reported that the objects were seen allegedly to be hovering motionless in the night sky for up to an estimated 8 to 10 minutes. Well, if that report is accurate, that fact by itself rules out the possibility that these objects were aircraft. There are a few aircraft in the world that can hover motionless, but they're usually relatively small. You don't get transport aircraft that can hover motionless in the night sky. And the ones that can are very loud, like the EA-6B, or trying to think of the aircraft that lands vertically, the vertical takeoff and landing aircraft.
Yeah, it has. They rotate. The engines rotate.
Yeah, if they're in hover, they're very loud.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to do it at low altitude. It's very difficult for them to remain in hovering condition at altitude.
That's right. Now, did the military's flight path, match up?
Well, I don't know. There are military flight paths. They're called oil burning routes that they have designated for their activities, usually for refueling operations and other operations that we probably know nothing about. But these aircraft appeared not to have been in any oil burner routes because they were at relatively low altitude. And that's, again, a very difficult aspect of an object to estimate, because if you don't know how far away an object is, you can't estimate its altitude, and you can't know how far away it is unless you know how big it is, and so on and so forth. But I'm on the, as I mentioned earlier in this broadcast, I'm on the fence with regard to this incident. And I would also like to add the fact that I am not blind to the fact that this incident occurred just a week before, to the day, the week before all this revelation took place in the on the pages of the New York Times about this office in the Pentagon that was charged with collecting data about UFO sightings. So it makes me wonder whether they could be linked in some way that I cannot see, and whether the government is having its hand forced by an alien presence which is showing them what it's capable of doing with regard to showing the American people a display of UFO technology.
Hey, if anything's possible. Now, what about MUFON? Did the sightings, the same sightings, or some come in that kind of corresponded with yours?
When I last talked to MUFON, I called Jan Harzan on Saturday night. He's the international director of the Mutual UFO Network. He's down in Los Angeles. And the reports that were coming to me were so dramatic and so convincing that I thought I'd like to bring MUFON into the fray at the early stage, and he quickly discovered that they were getting similar reports being reported to their state directors or state organizations. And we're going to share data so they can build a timeline and a ground track of these objects. And once that's done, it will tell us a great deal about what could or could not have taken place, and that in turn will tell us a lot about the nature of the objects involved.
That's great. And so do you often work together with MUFON on, or is
Quite
this...
frequently.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, I'm not an investigative organization. I would love to be. I'm much more the investigator by nature than I am an amanuensis or secretary to take telephone calls. And that's particularly the case as a result of these prank calls that are coming in. But I don't have the resource to send a team of at least 2 and preferably 4 or 6 people out to investigate a major incident like this. It's very, very expensive in terms of time and treasury to do an investigation. So
Yes.
I'm going to have to leave that up to MUFON, and I presume they're doing it, and I will turn my, I'm going to send a link to this military article to Jan and Chase Kletsky, who's involved in the investigation, they may already know about those reports, but we've got to decide, we've got to uncover and unravel whether this was in fact a military exercise or whether it might have been something else.
Right. So NUFORC has been basically collecting information since 1974. Are there files, actually, of sightings before the Internet came along?
Yes, but my predecessor, Bob Gribble, gave them to another party for reasons known only to him. He did that shortly after I took over the reins. So,
and had you, when you took over, were you at that time collecting, analog data?
Only for MUFON. I think at the time I had just resigned as state director for MUFON for the state of Washington, and I had files and records, but really didn't start a serious collection of records until I took over the hotline, and now I have file cabinet after file cabinet. But all those records are of little use. Really, the end product of what I do is a written report which we post to our website. I frequently get email from people saying, I'm interested in this case, could you open your files and send me everything you know about it? And I invariably write back and say, you know just about everything I know about that case if you've read the written report on our website. We don't keep secret files, if you will. We put everything that we collect on the Internet.
Yeah, and so people have asked me about, how protected are your backups? I mean, do you have any backups as far as, all the reports that have been done over the years on there?
Oh, yes. We keep the database of reports, and there are about 127,000 reports in the database.
Wow.
And we have roughly 113,000 of the 127,000 are posted to the Internet. The other reports are reports that are just foolishness, frankly. They're profane, have profanity in them, or they're just reports that are submitted by people who are not terribly balanced. And so we don't post those reports, but we leave them in the database because every once in a while I will make a decision not to post a report, but it turns out that I am wrong. And the case that comes to mind is the case of Mr. Todd Sees. It's a celebrated case that occurred in 2002, August of 2002. Man was seen being taken up into a saucer that hovered over Mount Montour in south central. And that was the last anybody saw of him alive when it was discovered that he was missing, and all of his things were found by his all-terrain vehicle on this mountaintop. Search party, including about 250 people, I seem to recall, was dispatched to try to find him, and they didn't find him until the next day, 7 p.m. He was taken up at about 5:30 a.m. on a Sunday. I believe it was the 4th of August, 2002, and people can see the reports on our website. They searched all that Sunday without finding him. They searched all Monday until the evening when his son, and tragically it was his son, found his father's remains suspended in underbrush or in a tree, in any event above ground level. And it is reported by seemingly authoritative sources that his remains were so grossly mutilated that not even his son could positively identify his father, the remains of his that he had discovered as those of his father.
Wow, that is that's not a typical situation, and that's absolutely terrible. Yeah, I mean, you don't hear of accounts of abductions. Well, someone said to me one time, "How do we know that people aren't being abducted and never brought back with all the missing people?" So I mean,
exactly.
which is kind of a point. I do want to invite the live listener, if you'd like to call in at this point and ask our guest a question, you can call in at 603-967-4030, or you can Skype in at Marty Willis. That's MartyWillis. I don't know why I did Marty Willis. It was available, but I don't like being called Marty, but that's okay. You can call me Marty if you want to. But so, Peter,
How nice it is to hear the area code 603.
Yeah.
Reminds me of my days in New Hampshire. And I should mention just briefly, back in 1965, I graduated from high school from Pinkerton Academy in East Derry Village, or Derry Village, rather.
Oh, yeah.
And that summer was the summer that the incident at Exeter occurred. And that was the first case I ever actively investigated. I was working for the Derry News at the time in Derry, New Hampshire. I'm sure you know where it is.
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
And my editor and I, all that summer, ironically, had a running debate on the subject of UFOs, I being the advocate, he being the cast-in-concrete skeptic. Well, when the Manchester Union Leader published the article, I think it was on the 4th or 5th of September 1965, my editor saw that article and he said, "Davenport, you're now a cub reporter. Put that broom down and get up to Exeter and get us a story."
Wow.
So I wrote an article that was published in the Derry News. The first installment was on the 13th of September 1965, the next one on the 16th of September, same month. And I was convinced. I talked to the two police officers who had seen it. I talked to the hitchhiker, Norman Muscarello, who had seen it.
Yeah.
And it was a doozy of a sighting, and it's what gave rise to the book entitled Incident at Exeter by John G. Fuller.
Right. And that's great. So you actually talked to firsthand witnesses.
Yeah.
Amazing. And I know that they celebrate that every year. I'm surprised they don't ask you to come out and talk about it, because they celebrate that.
Well, they've contacted me, but I think they run on a thin budget.
They do.
Don't even have money for an airline ticket.
Yeah, I believe that's correct. But I have gone to that a couple of times. It's always fun. It's free also, so they don't collect any fees that way.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. But so.
Well, I'd love to appear there sometime.
Yeah. I think that is one of the one of the important cases myself. And so Norman passed away kind of young, didn't he?
I think he did 3 or 4 years ago, I believe. When I talked to him in 1965, he was 18 years of age, as I recall. And he was on a delayed enlistment program with the U.S. Navy. So he was burning 180 days, I think it was, maybe 90 days before he enlisted. And he was actually the incident occurred not in Exeter so much as in Kensington.
Yeah.
just south of Exeter, a couple miles or so, maybe less than that. And I've actually stood on the road with Officer Bertrand. He and I went out to the site together where he had stood as he watched this disc with flashing lights flit all over a field. And it's a very interesting story. He was on patrol the night before on the 2nd of September, and he ran across a woman who had stopped her car along the roadside. I think she was in the center of a circle, a traffic circle, and she was almost hysterical. Even her dog, which was pressed down against the floor of the car, didn't want to get up on the seat. Both of them seemed to be very upset by what they'd just experienced, and I think he saw to it that the woman was taken to the hospital. She was so upset. Later, the next morning, when he heard Officer Tollefson broadcast the fact that a young teenager had just burst into the Exeter police station babbling about having been chased by a saucer, that Officer Bertrand drove in his cruiser to the headquarters, picked up the hitchhiker, Norman Muscarello, and they drove out together to Kensington, where Muscarello allegedly had seen this object. It actually chased him, as I recall, and he jumped off the roadway into a swamp and tried to conceal himself under some bushes. The object moved directly above him, and it tilted 90 degrees and turned its headlights on, so to speak, and illuminated the area where he was hunkered down under this bush intensely brightly. So it was a very, very convincing case, and I still enjoy reading the articles that I wrote for the Derry News. It was pretty heady stuff for a 17-year-old kid to be writing articles for a newspaper.
Wow. Did that have did that affect you in a way to, I know you said you had a sighting early on in your life, or I believe you did.
Yes, correct.
So did this really we have a call coming in, so I'd like to take that if that's all right.
That sounds fine. I look forward to it.
Okay. Caller, welcome to the show. Please give your first name and where you're calling from.
Hi, Martin. It's Donnie. How are you?
Donnie, the police officer, Donnie.
Hi.
Well, the retired one.
The retired one.
Hi,
hey.
Donnie.
How are you?
Hey, Peter. How are you?
I'm doing well. How nice to have you on the program with us.
Oh, hey, thank you. It's good to hear you back on again. I wanted to pop in here real quick because Martin and I were talking a couple weeks ago, and this is before the latest revelation about the Nimitz and the Tic Tac case with the gun camera footage, which is just astonishing. But what I wanted to ask you, Peter, has NUFORC gotten any fresh reports or data from military sources, given the current state of affairs with the North Koreans and the saber rattling? I would imagine there's got to be a ton of activity in the Sea of Japan and all kinds of weird things happening on the Korean Peninsula. What's your take on that, Peter?
Good question. Military sources are, in my opinion, some of the most reliable and useful sources of information that we receive. I have received many, many reports from military officers and enlisted as well, people who've been aboard ships, Navy personnel, from Coast Guard personnel who've been aboard ships when they had dramatic sightings, taken reports from people who are aboard a submarine, although they didn't follow up with a written report, tragically, so it's a wasted case. Pilots, military pilots, civilian pilots, and a lot of people in desert who participated in the Desert Storm hostilities. They saw some very strange things. In fact, one of those cases goes back to August one of the cases I received, August of 2001, I believe it was, got a report from a gentleman who'd seen aliens inside the tent that's where 6 or 8 soldiers were sleeping, and it came up to him and touched him in the forehead, and he remembers nothing beyond that point. Very dramatic case.
Wow. That is quite a story.
Yep.
Donnie, anything else for Peter?
No, just really curious about that, and any guests that come on where they collect data. I think now's the time. My own opinion. I think now's the time where we're going to see a lot of activity. Look at what happened with. I mean, I keep going back to Randle, probably my favorite case. Well, up until this recent one, which is probably my new favorite. But in any event, it seems to me that when the sabers rattle, these things really start to come out, and these things really start to hover and fly around our air bases in particular, and probably in our ships at sea. So that's all I want to ask. Good to hear you, Peter.
Yeah.
And it's always a pleasure, Martin, and I'll pass it over to somebody else.
All right.
Okay,
Hey, Donnie, Merry
thanks for your
Christmas
call.
to you. Yes.
Hey, same to you guys, too. Be well.
All right. Take care. Yeah. So that is interesting to me when it comes to military, and I agree with you. It seems like more credible, I guess you'd call it.
Yep. Yeah, there are people who are oftentimes trained to one degree or another, oftentimes to a high degree, and they're not the type of people to fabricate stories. Once you've been in combat or training for combat, you recognize the need for accurate, reliable communication. And people who've been in the military are, in my opinion, and it's been my observation, more reliable in that respect than the average person calling from his apartment who's never been in the military.
Yeah, I agree. We have another caller. Caller, your first name, where are you calling from?
Hey, Stephen, Oregon.
Hi,
Portland.
how you doing? Welcome to the show. Oh, you're right out right out by Peter, not too far away.
You're calling
pretty
from
close.
Oregon, did you say, Stephen?
Yeah, right down in southern Washington.
Yeah.
Just
probably
north of Portland.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Near Vancouver, I presume.
Yep, in Vancouver,
Yeah.
which nobody knows, so I always say Portland.
So you have a question for our guest?
I do. One of the cases I followed with interest for years is the Phoenix Lights, and it seems pretty clear there was something legitimate happened at 8:30 that night, and
Absolutely.
then at 10:15, it appears to me that the military deliberately did a flare drop to kind of create to kind of throw dirt in the air and confuse everybody.
Conceal the evidence, or be able to mix it up a little bit so nobody would know anything. Once you bury a signal with noise, it's hard to understand what's going on.
And I just really wanted to, I've never heard you speak specifically to the 10 o'clock thing that, what's her name, put in her documentary, the UFO Lights.
Dr. Lynn Katai?
Yeah, Lynn Katai. I mean, those films, in your view, was the 10 o'clock flare drop. Is that true for you, as it is for me?
Well, I tend to agree with you. I believe that the objects that were seen from the Phoenix area in the southwest at about 10 o'clock almost certainly were flares, but people put me in the doghouse for that claim. I tend to agree with you that the military had enough time to, if they had A-10s on the ground in an air base down near Tucson. I'm groping for the name of it. Davis-Monthan Air Force Base is what I was searching for. If they had A-10s, they could have gotten them to the Gila Bend firing range and dumped out a bunch of flares in time for people to be confused by what they were looking at, to muddy the waters, as you correctly put it. But one thing a lot of people don't know is that, according to Bill Hamilton in his book on the Phoenix Lights, the U.S. military forces were elevated from Defense Condition 5, which is a normal peacetime condition, to DEFCON 3 in one single step.
Wow.
They skipped 4 altogether. Another fact that I find particularly intriguing is that President Bill Clinton, who earlier that morning on the 13th of March, 1997, had been flown from Washington, D.C. down to Florida, where he spent the day golfing with the professional golfer from Australia, Greg Norman. And President Clinton spent the night at Greg Norman's house that night, somewhere in Florida, Miami or Orlando, perhaps. I've forgotten where it was.
That's right. That's right.
And that was the night that President Clinton allegedly injured the ligaments of his knee so badly that it required him to be evacuated from Greg Norman's house in a very hurried manner and flown to Washington, D.C., where he allegedly underwent surgery on one of his knees.
Right.
Well, my suspicion is, absent proof, suspicion, is that all of that was a cover story to get President Clinton to a military safe area where his whereabouts would not be known, which I presume is part of the Defense Condition Declaration. I presume that when DEFCON 3 is declared, that's, by the way, one step short of all-out global warfare, that somebody has the presence of mind to pick up a telephone and contact the president or his Secret Service detachment, and they would move him very, very quickly. And either he did sustain an injury, presumably when they were rushing him through a house where he'd never been to a waiting vehicle, or he did not sustain an injury. They were using the injury as a cover story to prevent the press from getting wind of the UFO event that had just taken place, or was in fact still taking place over Phoenix that night. Either scenario is equally logical in my mind.
That's right. Yeah, the timing, if you actually look at the timing of when he supposedly went down and the Phoenix Lights, I mean, the timing lines up perfectly from where he was on the East
seconds
Coast.
Or minutes, yes.
Right. And then one other question I had on that. Just, it seems to me that the military response came off, it was remarkable that if the 8:30 sighting, like when I see Mike Fortson or Tim Lay or some of the 8:30 witnesses, I mean, they're very compelling for the Phoenix Lights. That the fact that the military could work out some sort of way to muddy the waters in just under 2 hours, and that they're so willing and so capable to do that so quickly. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I agree with you, and I commend the caller for his insight into what the military or the government seems to be able to do. In fact, it calls to mind, it brings to my memory a UFO that appears to have blown up over Warren County, Tennessee, McMinnville, Tennessee, not Oregon, McMinnville, Tennessee, on the 6th of January, 1995. Within approximately 90 minutes, people who identified themselves as working for the U.S. government were knocking on people's doors in McMinnville, Tennessee, in permission to go on their property to look for fragments of an aircraft that had blown up. I include that in PowerPoint lecture when I'm talking on the data I've collected over the last 23 years. But I agree with you entirely. The flares over Gila Bend firing range during the Phoenix Lights event, I think, was disinformation. And that's why at the outset of this program, I was very cautious not to accept the U.S. government's explanation for the events that occurred just less than 2 weeks ago all across 12 or 14 states. The facts in the reports that we posted to our website are not compatible with the scenario that the U.S. Air Force is presenting.
Interesting.
Yeah, the one other point, the F-18 pilots who went on CNN and talked and showed the film that they took of the UFO west of San Diego the other day. They show that film. The pilots got over 3,500 hours, and then they say, but we canceled the program because there's nothing to it. It's just,
like Blue
it's
Book.
really, I don't, there's just such a disconnect there.
Yeah.
So anyway.
It's what it tells us is the government is lying to the American people on the subject of UFOs, and that takes us into a whole different discussion and arena. And the ultimate question I ask is, could it be possible that the U.S. government is in one way or another, or many ways perhaps, being influenced by the presence of aliens on our planet? I look at what the U.S. government is doing to the American people as opposed to, in my opinion, for the American people, and I start becoming very uncomfortable, like a $20 trillion debt. These are not unintelligent people in Congress by any means. Mm-hmm. They are crafty. They know what they're doing, and there may be some very good reason that they have taken us into $20 trillion of debt to benefit their agenda and not benefit the American people. That worries me profoundly.
Hey, well, thank you for the call.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, good comments. I tip my hat in your direction in Vancouver.
Yeah, thanks. Have a good night, guys.
Good night. So anyone else wants to call in? We still have 15 minutes left. That number again is 603-967-4030. Yeah, I think, the Phoenix Lights, it was really great to talk to you, especially earlier on when you were giving some details, because I had heard about that, the pilot that went up, and I heard he was really shaken, but I've never heard of the details that you gave. That's a lot of times I will talk about what I think is, the top 10 sightings, and Phoenix Lights is in there, kind of near the top.
Yeah, another thing that I'd like to point out is that object over Camelback Mountain that I alluded to that was intercepted by the two F-15s, I took a great deal of heat from the public affairs officer of Luke Air Force Base, a young woman, who said, Mr. Davin, this is on a radio broadcast in Phoenix, she said, we don't even have F-15s. Luke Air Force Base is exclusively an F-16 training base. And I said, but Lieutenant so-and-so, I've forgotten her name, or she might have been a captain, you had F-15 fighters on the ground on hot pads, and that was the reason those F-15s, rather than 16s, were dispatched. And I said, moreover, I have reason to believe that those two F-16s earlier in the day had been part of the military flotilla that had accompanied the president to Florida. It's known as the Air Force One and Air Force Two Protection Group. It's a very select group of aviators who are dedicated to protecting the president or vice president or any dignitary when that person is in the air. And at that point, as I recall, the public affairs officer stated that she had to bow out of this program because the Air Force One and Air Force Two Protection Group up to that point was a little-known group, and it's a group that the Air Force did not talk about, or other military services. Oftentimes, when the president flies in an aircraft, he is accompanied by probably as many as 6 aircraft. Oftentimes, there are 2 from the Air Force, 2 from the Navy, and 2 from the Marine Corps. In addition to probably an AWACS, which reaches out and can detect for 500 or 1,000 miles or even further any potential threat to the president's aircraft. And when I mentioned this group, the public affairs officer suddenly didn't want to talk about that incident anymore. And I think those F-15s were scrambled because they were the only aircraft on the ground at Luke Air Force Base that had, one, the armament that they would want to have intercepting a UFO. Number two, they had Lantern 2 pods, which is a low amplification navigation pod. It also has cameras in it, which allows the pilot to reach out and photograph something. I suspect they got very good photographs of that UFO over Camelback Mountain using that Lantern 2 pod. One of the slides I use in my public presentation on the Phoenix Lights is a photograph of what a Lantern 2 pod looks like slung under the starboard wing of an F-15 or an F-16. So I suspect that those two F-15s on hot pads ready to launch at Luke Air Force Base were on hot pads because whenever the president gets a sudden urge to get a hamburger, they have to be, those fighter pilots have to be ready to go at the immediately. And well, enough said on that incident. I suspect there's a great deal more to the Phoenix Lights than the government has revealed.
Sure. Now, what about, let's say, what about during the Stephenville, Texas UFO incident? Were you contacted on that mass sighting as well?
Yeah, I was contacted immediately by some of the witnesses who described it in great detail. Unfortunately, I was out of town for one night on January 8th. That was 2008.
2008, right, yeah.
And I didn't get a chance to talk to the Stephenville witnesses until later, but I had them on several radio programs, and they were very convincing. And the fact that those objects were very near President Bush's ranch explains why it was being chased by F-16s. It went over Stephenville going to generally the northwest, seen by a number of people who were about 2 or 3 miles to the south of downtown Stephenville. And a few minutes later, as the witnesses were standing, they were tending a campfire at the time they saw this object to the north of them. And it actually hovered over Stephenville, according to a number of the witnesses. But a few minutes after they'd seen it going to the northwest, back it came even faster now, being pursued by 2 F-16s. And when they saw this group of aircraft in front of them, I think it was 2 F-16s, I'm going on memory, while they were watching the craft and the F-16s chasing it, the craft suddenly accelerated away from the F-16 fighters so fast that the visual impression that the witnesses on the ground had was that it had left the F-16s hovering motionless in the night sky.
Wow.
But I'm flabbergasted that presidents are still saying they want to know about UFOs. They know about them. They've been involved in evacuations and scrambles of F-16s. Presumably, when the military detects something in the vicinity of the president, and they scramble F-16s, somebody bothers to pick up the telephone and call the president's entourage to let them know what's going on. They would have to, because if they had fighter aircraft passing overhead at high speed on afterburner, I think they would be a little concerned if they didn't know the reason for that scramble.
Right. You talk about the F-16s. I've always thought those cases were really fascinating, where people will report one being, chased by 1 or 2, military aircraft. There's a lot of them. As a matter of fact, I have I've mentioned a couple of times on this show that I have a friend that is actually on the Antiques Roadshow that doesn't really want to talk about. He actually tried to call me during this podcast just now, about a half hour ago. But he had a sighting while he was in college in Amherst, Mass. And the thing was chased by, fighter jets. And really, it just shot off. It was an amazing sighting. He told me. I was shocked that he told me the story. He won't come on the air about it, though. I've asked him.
Well, if he's listening, I'd point out to him that all those oral accounts of UFO sightings are worth nothing. Mm-hmm. You have to write down the details and preserve it in written form, and moreover, convey it to an organization like the National UFO Reporting Center, of which I am director, or the Mutual UFO Network. Get it in the hands of an organization that can post it to a website to let the world know about that sighting, and which can also compare this new sighting with other sightings for the same date or approximate date.
Yeah.
They have to be written down. Everybody wants to chit-chat about his UFO sighting. It's a waste of everybody's time, in my opinion. And just a statistic I would like to share with our audience, if I may, Martin.
Sure.
I estimate that out of 20,000 people in the United States, adult, competent, clear-thinking American people with normal sensory perception, who have seen what they sincerely believe was or could have been a UFO, out of 20,000 such cases, only one of those people ever comes forward.
One? My goodness. Wow.
So we're getting 1 out of 20,000 reports or witnesses to come forward. And of those people who contact the UFO Center, for example, out of 100 calls I get of what I consider to be legitimate reports of genuine UFOs, only about 20 or tragically, only about 20 or 30 out of 100 will follow up by submitting a written report. So we're getting, out of 100,000 of UFOs over the United States, we're getting only one written report. And it's just infuriating to have people call. This happened on the night of December 9th. The first guy to call me has yet to submit a follow-up report. I've placed 12 calls to his number. He never answers his number and has not submitted a written report. Drives me crazy.
Do you think that people start thinking about a situation and say, "Nah, I don't want to get involved," or why do you think that happens?
I don't know. I think the principal reason is Americans are lazy and they can't write. It makes me very angry. We spend a king's ransom on K-12 education. Most of them don't graduate, and all of them can't write a competent sentence. And they have a repugnance to writing. They want to talk and chit-chat and gabble and babble about their sighting. They'll say the same thing that they want to emphasize 6 and 8 times in a conversation, but they will not write it down. They'll talk for hours, but they don't have 15 minutes to write it all down.
Yeah. Well, it's nothing you can do to change that, unfortunately. Just the way things have turned. But I guess what has to happen, we see this with, technologies and stuff like that, is everything kind of has to adjust to how, the society is turning. So there's no real answer to writing down except for someone leaving, an audio account, of what they had. But then again, you couldn't store that type of thing.
Yeah. Well, let it be said, too, that most people read at 300 to 600 words a minute. When you talk, you're talking at maybe 90 to 120 words a minute. So the written word is much, much more efficient, and it records things, and hopefully records things in an organized fashion, so it can be consumed by the reader in a logical manner. again, talking to somebody, they're emotionally involved, they haven't organized their thoughts, and they just spew a listener with everything they want to say, and oftentimes do it several times, say the same thing over and over and over again to emphasize it. Talking is a very inefficient means of communication, and the written word is much more reliable, much more organized, and much more useful for a number of purposes.
Well, speaking of that, Peter, have you ever considered writing a book on the UFO topic?
I'd love to write a book. There's several ideas I have. Interestingly, if I were to write a book, the first one would be about the elements of human psychology that I have been witness to as a UFO investigator. The things people say and do and believe, or don't say, don't do, and don't believe, would fill a encyclopedia, I'm afraid, and seen some very peculiar facets to human psychology as a UFO investigator.
Yeah.
There are a number of books I would like to write. My problem is this, Martin, so our listeners understand my situation. A typical day, I work 2 shifts a day, 7 days a week, every day of the year, to get the data that I have on our website posted. And it's one of the reasons I get so annoyed at people who can't take 15 minutes to write down the details of their sighting report. I have very little sympathy for them.
So, okay, Peter, we're right at the end of the show. So what happens when, say, you're probably going to say you're never going to retire, but what happens when you do retire?
I think they'll carry me out on my shield with my boots on.
Is there someone else that can fill those big shoes of yours?
How would you like to take over a hotline? It'll change your life. I don't know. I struggle with that question every day. What I need is a staff and a facility and a budget.
Yeah.
And I've tried for 23 years to fulfill that need, and I've been totally unsuccessful.
Wow. Well, Peter, I know that a lot of the listeners out there really, really appreciate what you do.
Well, thank you.
And
it's
also,
a lot of work.
Yeah,
in some respects gratifying.
Well, I'm glad. And also, again, the listener can write at martin@podcastufo.com if you have any ideas how to help Peter stop all those prank calls. And Peter, I hope that stops. And I want to wish you happy holidays.
Thank you. Merry Christmas to you and to all our listeners, and we'll do this again sometime, Martin.
I sure hope so. It's always a great pleasure, Peter. Take care.
Thank you very much for the airtime.
All right.
I've enjoyed it.
Great.
Bye.
All right, everyone. So thank you very much for listening, and we'll be back next week. I want to thank everybody that helped out with the show, Kevin Randle, Alejandro Rojas, of course, Peter Davenport. And I have to tell you, next week is going to be the weirdest show that I have done. I don't know how else to say it, but I have a movie producer. He's going to be talking about his movie that has been released. It's called Love and Saucers, and it's going to be a weird one, so you're going to have to check it out. And again, thanks so much. And remember, as always, have a wonderful holiday season. Merry Christmas to those of you who celebrate, and keep your eyes to the sky. Look for more than just Santa and the sleigh up there.